Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Last episode, we had a 4-part book quest called The Far Side of Tears. It was a very interesting read, and I hope that you were able to come along that journey with me. Today's episode, we are going to be reading and learning a little bit more about the Erudites. I'm actually here in the Sundered Frontier. Peniel is behind me across the way there, and I thought that would make a nice backdrop for this story. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I have been Zal Arid's apprentice for several years now, and have witnessed his ingenuity and enlightened insight firsthand. I guess I should have surmised that one day Zal Arid would challenge Erudite in some capacity. I just never thought he would engage in open debate with the Erudite Council itself. Yet there we were, walking through the city of those we once considered enemies, preparing to meet with those who shunned and stood against us for so long. Zal Arid said little as we approached the council hall itself. I could tell that he was lost in thought, no doubt going over his research in his head, anticipating questions and counter-arguments that would come up during the debate. Occasionally, he would ask for a specific page or manual, but other than that, he said nothing. He didn't even seem to notice the Deepwater Knights escorting us, and only gave a dismissing nod or wave of his hand to the attendants assigned to us when they asked if he required assistance or refreshments. While my master mused silently to himself, I took the time to observe my surroundings. I had never been to Erudite before, and I was impressed with the beauty and craftsmanship of the halls, the pillars, the fountains, and artwork placed throughout the city. Everything seemed open and tranquil, but I knew that the people that lived here were a stark contrast to the city itself, choosing to be oppressive and judgmental of magics they feared or didn't understand. They would never be as enlightened or learned as those of us who called Peniel our home. Finally, we arrived at the waiting chamber. We were instructed to sit and await the summons from the council. Zal Arid nodded courteously and took a seat near a large marble table. I sat across from him and set his notes up where he could reach them. I then turned and looked toward the large doors leading into the council chamber. I couldn't help feeling a sense of dread, knowing that even though the scholars of Erudite and Peniel were now working together, my master and I were entering this chamber as enemies, opponents to the great plan of the residents of Erudite. As he worked on what I assume were his final notes, Zal Arid must have sensed my unease. "What troubles you, apprentice?" he queried. I hadn't expected him to address me at all. I was taken aback by the break of his silence. It was all I could do to muster up a response without stammering like a fool. "Oh, my apologies, master," I replied. "Being here in this place, I never imagined we would be facing the Erudite Council this way. I can't help but feel a sense of dread." Zal Arid continued to work on his notes when he responded. "Why's that? Do you not trust my research and findings?" "Oh, of course, master," I responded quickly, sensing the veiled annoyance in his voice. "But it's just that there will be many of them in there. What if they align against you?" "They were fools before the alliance between our cities," he answered quietly. and they are fools now. My research is sound, whereas theirs is not. The surest way to win any debate, apprentice, is to have the correct information before that debate starts. Zalarid had long been skeptical of Erudite's plan to construct a new nexus. When the plan was proposed by the Erudite high scholar Erudite, I could immediately tell that Zalarid sensed something was amiss. He never spoke about it much, but he immediately sent me into the libraries of Peniel for dusty tomes and books buried far within the shelves. To this day, I have no idea how he knew those particular works were even in there. However, he pored through them, making notes and charts, not sleeping or eating for days. His research was very methodical. He never seemed hasty or rushed, and he would check and double-check everything he recorded. I was the only one allowed to visit him during his research, and even then, he would not allow me to set eyes on his calculations or research notes. Eventually, he emerged with notes in hand and called for a session with Coriante Verisu and her council. I'm not sure what transpired in that meeting, but when Zalarid emerged, he was certainly not pleased and retreated immediately into his chamber. This repeated twice more, both with the same result. Whatever my master was looking for, he wasn't finding it with the leadership of Peniel. Late one evening, I received a summons from Zalarid. He asked me to meet him within his chambers promptly. When I arrived, I could see that he had prepared for a journey of some sort. When I asked where he was heading, he did not answer. Rather, he commanded me to load the pack steeds and make ready to depart. We were leaving immediately. There wasn't much to pack, really, mostly tomes and charts and notes, but there were a great many of each of them. We traveled for some time, our trip made longer by having to stick to the shores to avoid Toxulia forest. When we arrived at our destination near the shore of the vasty deep, I was surprised to see that we were greeted by none other than Deepwater Knights. At first I suspected an attack, but they appeared to be welcoming of my master and me. When I was assisting with the unpacking of our provisions and supplies, I noticed that Zalarid had walked off with one of the knights, the captain who had greeted us. I could not make out their conversation, but it seemed that my master was talking and the knight was listening and agreeing. This was something I had never imagined I would witness in my years. As it turned out, it was Zalarid's intention to meet with and address the High Council of Erudite. He met with dignitaries and high scholars over the next couple of days, and we waited for the council to convene and hear my master's testimony. Now that the time had come, as I sat nervous and in apprehension, Zalarid continued working and studying, exemplifying the rigid dedication and knowledge that helps define our people, the one trait that unifies all erudites across Norath. Finally, the large doors creaked open, and a tall man dressed in the gold and white of the council stepped out. Master Zalarid, the High Council of Erudite will see you now. Very well, my master replied. He patiently gathered up his notes and his charts, stood and nodded to me, indicating that I was to follow. Together, we walked into the council chamber of Erudite. And that is the end of the first story. Volume 2. I will never forget the chambers of the High Council. Never have I been in a place where I felt such scrutiny and indeed such oppression. I knew that it was here that the council banished Miragol for practicing the art of necromancy, thereby cutting an entire sphere of knowledge and learning from their studies. It was here that they chose to engage in war against the people of Peniel for pursuing that very knowledge in our quest to understand. The biggest surprise was waiting for my master and me when we entered the chamber itself. While I had expected the majority of the council to be in attendance, I was not expecting to find many of the Peniel High Court, including Coriante Verisou herself, sitting amongst the crowd. I looked over to Zalarid to gauge his reaction, but as always he remained impassive. It was almost as if he expected to see them there. Perhaps he had even planned on it. The hall itself was dimly lit, save a few lights along the back wall, and a large beam of light illuminating a platform in the center of the room. I sat on a bench near the stairs leading to the raised rows of seats where the council sat. Zalarid walked to the center of the platform, entering the pillar of light, facing the council of Erudite and the court of Peniel. There was no podium for him to lay his notes on, no seat for him to rest comfortably on the platform. He seemed untroubled, confidently facing those before him. One of the scholars amongst the counselors stepped down the stairs near me, and I could see that she wore the large headpiece of the arbiters. She would preside over the debate, ensuring that it would not collapse into a free-for-all argument. I was concerned again because she was clearly chosen from among the scholars of Erudite, but it was a logical choice given where we now were. Master Zalarid, she began, you have requested audience with the High Council of Erudite to discuss the viability of Elarad's wise plan to put the teleportation network back in the hands of mortals and out of the hands of the gods who took it from us. That is correct, Arbiter, my master responded. As you can see, in the interest of cooperation with the city of Peniel, we have brought some of their esteemed court to this noble hall, so that they might have a voice in these proceedings. Therefore, you will be speaking to both cities, and will receive a unified response from all the Erudite people. Do you understand this? The speaker inquired. I do, Arbiter, Zalarid replied. Very well, then. Please explain to the council what brings you before us. I am here to solicit the help of the High Council of Erudite with regards to the aforementioned rebuilding of the Spire network and construction of the Ultran Nexus within Queluthil. I believe this to be a highly questionable act, one that warrants scrutiny and further deliberation before we proceed further. Questionable? Came a voice from the council. In what way? Several mutters of agreement could be heard among the crowd. Indeed, Counselor, my master said coolly. I believe that this research is based upon faulty information, and that this poorly conceived plan could very well imperil all of Otis if not all of Norath itself. The council chamber erupted with incredulous humphs, angry retorts, and mocking laughter. Some of the councillors were standing now, shouting back their responses over the uproar started by Zalarid's words. "What would you have us do?" one shouted. "There is no teleportation, and we're cut off from the rest of Norath without it." "How dare you speak of the greatest minds in Norath with impudence?" called out another. The arbiter worked feverishly to calm the cacophony of anger. My master stood unmoving, watching the reaction of the council and waiting for the noise to subside. When it finally subsided, he opened his mouth as if to speak. However, before he could, another voice cut through the chamber. "You see, I warned you that he would waste the time of this esteemed council." I was surprised to hear that it was none other than Corianti Versu, the head of the High Court of Peniel, speaking out against one of the wisest scholars the city of Peniel had ever known. "He wasted the time of the High Court of Peniel 3 times over, and now he has come to the High Council of Erudite to do the same." "Well, what gives you the right, scholar, to question the consensus of the scholars of the Erudite people?" Another counselor spoke out. "The province of facts, counselor, the province of facts," Zalarid replied. "As I said, your conclusions are based on unsound information, and it is my duty to report my findings for consideration." It was obvious that the High Council of Erudite had heard enough. My master attempted to speak over the din, but they were no longer listening. Still, he remained calm, answering each objection as he could. After several minutes of this, another counselor stood up, raised his hand quietly. The noise in the chamber stopped almost immediately, and even the arbiter stepped aside, out of the beam of light where Zalarid now stood. The figure walked down the aisle toward the stairs leading to the flat platform below. I was unable to make out his face through the light, and even if I could, I'm not sure I would have known who this man was. The counselor said nothing as he approached Zalarid. The two scholars stood face to face for a few moments before anyone spoke. In spite of what could have been defined as a tense few moments between adversaries, I sensed neither malice or anger from them. "Your words are stinging and harsh, scholar," the man began. "If you are here to save all of Otis as you claim, seeking the help of those that were once enemies, would it not be best to attempt some form of diplomacy?" I speak factually," Zalarid said to the man standing before him. "I do not believe that pointing out the flaws inherent in your plan are an insult to anyone, save perhaps yourself if you choose them to be." It was at that moment that I realized who this counselor was. This was none other than Erudite himself, High Scholar of Erudite and primary architect of Altar and Spire Network Plan. That's the end of Part 2. Part 3? "Indeed," was Erudite's response. I could see his face clearly now, and admittedly it was hard not to look at him in awe. This was the man who had proposed the rebuilding of the Nexus, and it was through his guidance that the two cities were now cooperating and working toward a common goal. To imagine that Zalarid now stood against the man who brokered peace between our cities made me ill. But I knew that my master was no fool, and would not be here unless he was certain of his position. Let me assure you that I'm not offended by your accusations, Zelarod said calmly. However, I'm puzzled. What is it you think you have discovered that compels you to argue so vehemently against our plan? It is not what I think I've discovered, Elarad, my master returned. It is what I have ascertained through rigorous study and calculations. Your plan is flawed because it is based off incorrect information. Oh, and what information is that, scholar? Elared asked. You're attempting to reconstruct a spire transportation network to replace the now non-functional combined spires, yet you based your design off the combined spires themselves. My calculations suggest that the new spires will still attempt to connect to the Luckland Nexus as did the originals. Although I cannot be certain at this point, my research suggests a dangerous feedback of mystical energy resulting from that. Elarod interrupted my master's speech. You cannot be certain of the outcome, yet you stand before this high court asking us to cease what could be the greatest achievement of the Erudite people? And why? Based on admittedly uncertain information. Well, the only thing I'm certain of is the outcome, Zalarid returned. At best, the spire simply will not function. I'm still working on the calculations for any other outcome aside from that. Well, what then do we have to lose if the spires do not work as we designed them to? If your calculations cannot conclude any other outcome with any degree of certainty, why are we holding this court? Elarad asked. He had a hint of amusement in his voice. My master's always had impeccable control over his emotions. It is a rare case when I have seen him allow circumstances to get him visibly upset. In most every situation, Zalarid is deconstructing and analyzing the situations around him and formulating plans for any given situation. I could see, though, that Elarad was beginning to make my master's shell of logical detachment begin to crack. At the time, I could not be certain as to why, since Zalarid had been in many such open debates, but I knew that something was different this time. I believe, esteemed scholar, that the spire's not functioning is the least likely outcome, Zalarid said sharply. In fact, I believe the most likely outcome is more likely, as I said before, something more catastrophic. That's why I mentioned it at the beginning of this court. You are questioning all of the scholars who have worked on this project, all of the great erudite minds, both from Eredin and from Peniel, and all of the hours upon hours of research that has been poured into what we are attempting to accomplish? Elarad turned to face the counselor seated behind him. You are saying to this court, to these scholars, to these people, that all of their research is flawed while yours is accurate? We're supposed to take this based on what? Your uncertainty, which you cannot support the facts? Indeed, Zalarid responded to a chorus of jeers and disapproving murmurs. I believe that more time and research must be dedicated before we begin this project in earnest. We can still get to Antonica by sea, so there's ample time to conduct further study. So you admit your contempt for your peers, then? Elarad said, a slight chuckle in his voice. Turning to Zalarid, his gaze narrowed. Tell me something. How many generations of your family have lived within Peniel? I am the first, counselor, Zalarid answered. Interesting, Erudite mused, as he began to circle my master. Tell me then, who were your parents, if not scholars from Peniel? Zalarid hesitated briefly before he could answer. However, Corianti Verisu wasted no time in answering for him. They were deep-water knights, were they not, scholar? She called out, the disdain evident in her voice. Indeed, Zalarid said loudly, my parents were both members of that order. Well, and why then did you leave Erudite as a traitor to live within Peniel? Erudite asked, punctuating the offensive word traitor. Because the scholars of Erudite have proven to be short-sighted and narrow in their thinking. The angry muttering from the crowd grew ever larger. And it is also true that the Deepwater Knights have opposed this project from the beginning? Erudite began, never taking his eyes off my master. Is it not true that they have made their own short-sighted and narrow way of thinking very clear to this court, and to all of Erudite very well known? Calls of agreement began to echo off the walls of the High Court. I began to shift uncomfortably, unable to hold back my unease. Tell me, scholar, Erudite said fiercely, did you not go to the High Court of Peniel simply as a mouthpiece for your parents' order? Are you not just repeating the rhetoric of the Deepwater Knights, looking to spread their fear and lies to any and all who would listen? Oh, how dare you! Zalarid retorted, seething now with anger. My research is my own. My master thrust his notes into the air, shaking them toward the seated council. My calculations and findings are sound. I challenge any one of you to study my notes and find a flaw within them, as I have found flaws within yours. The council chamber erupted into jeers. Throw him out! Came the calls from the benches. I've heard enough! My master attempted to argue back, but the crowd was no longer paying him any heed. Erudite walked backwards out of the light, almost melting into the darkness beyond. It was clear that he had done what he had set out to do. It was over. The large, heavy doors to the council chamber closed behind us as we left the chamber. As we walked slowly down the hall, I saw that Zalarid had calmed considerably. Before I could speak, he spoke to me. There's something else amiss here. I can't be certain what it is, but Erudite has another motive. I could sense it, but I can't put my finger on it. I nodded my agreement because I was not sure where my master was going with his thoughts. We must find out more. I want you to go to the library of Erudite. Begin seeking out whatever information you can there. Listen in on the scholars' conversations. Observe what tomes they're researching. Find out who is associating with whom. Whatever is happening here, it is intertwined with the Nexus experiment, and thus could decide the fate of all of Otis. We must learn all we can as quickly as we can. Well, I was surprised, to say the very least. Master? I stammered. Please forgive me. Planning for the next round of debates is one thing, but looking for a web of conspiracy is something completely different. How can you... Do not question me, apprentice, he said firmly. I ask only that you follow my instructions, and speak none of this to anyone. It is imperative that this remain between you and me. As you wish, master, I replied. Zalarid looked at me. There will not be another round of debates. I am sure that Erudite will see to that. Meet me in 3 days back on the shore of the vasty deep with your notes. Be as discreet as you can. I will, I answered. Where will you be? Zalarid looked away. I'm going to meet with the Deepwater Knights and begin to compare notes. Where that meeting will take me, I cannot say. I nodded. Very well. I will meet you in 3 days. Indeed, Zalarid answered. And apprentice, watch your back. I froze for a moment, hearing the deliberate cold tone of his voice. When I turned around, Zalarid was gone. I will not fail you, my master. I will not fail. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the story. And what's interesting about this is, if you have watched my episode 12, it was a reading about the collected writings of a mysterious erudite. Thinking back, I believe that that particular episode came long after this reading. If you enjoy my channel, please subscribe and also click a like on this video. And thank you very much for joining me today. Take care all. Bye-bye now.